I can't stand them. But I did see in Christchurch after everybody cashed up, the women went out and bought clothes, the men went out and bought utes and big sort of huge SUVs. So, I mean, I find those vehicles repugnant.
Neil, is it the height off the ground? Is it the feeling of security? What is it with an SUV?
Yeah, I think they just want to feel big. And so, you see so many black SUVs going around and none of them have any dirt on them. They've never been off-road. They're dropping the kids off to school and then driving up the driveway and that's it. I think it's just a feeling of power. And also, I think people think they're safe because if they crash into someone, the other person's going to be in trouble, but they're so high and far away that they'll be fine. So, yeah, I don't really see the need for them unless you're Special Forces or a farmer.
The Ford Ranger, the Hilux, the Mitsubishi Triton, big sellers, and at the snootier end of the market, at the upper end of the market, BMW has regained its position as our top luxury car. Last year, Mercedes snatched that crown, but it's Beamers, Mercs and Audis at the moment. And overseas, the amazing-looking new Lamborghini Centenario is out, 770 horsepower, 0 to 300 in 23 seconds, they advertise. Look, luxury sales of cars are up all over the world.
Yeah, I would cripple myself trying to get into that car. It would be so low to the ground that it would be like trying to drive while in a bed.
So what is the mode of transport you would procure if price was no problem to you, either of you?
Oh, look, chauffeur-driven, or I like one of those Jeeps for MASH, just one of those that just blat around on.
Yeah, I'd like a Jaguar XJ6 driven by Scarlett Johansson.
Okay, thank you. The words have all been spoken, although they'll be spoken again many times, I'm sure. And the voting has begun. The flag we have got, or the silver fern against blue and black, and we'll know on the 30th of March. But in case we don't see you before then, your thoughts, please, on the process and the outcome of this. What do you reckon's going to happen?
Well, the process was absolutely abysmal. It's been a disaster for Key. There's so many parts to this whole flag debate now. Key's saying if you hate me, don't use to squander your vote, and this could be a missed opportunity. We may never get to vote in our generation again, but then we could get stuck with a flag that we don't like, and some people have likened to a tea towel or a beach towel, and then we will, well, if we're stuck with that, it'll be even longer before we can change it.
All right, Neil?
I actually think the process has been pretty good. I mean, both main political parties, and in fact the Greens as well, had committed to changing the flag before the last election. And I think it's become way too party political. But I was walking through Parliament the other day with a friend, and I was saying, and there'll be flags flying if there are dignitaries, and it wasn't very windy because it never is in Wellington. And they said, what flag is that? And I'm like, well, I have to wait till the wind blows to tell you whether it's New Zealand or Australia. I mean, we are that close. I mean, it turns out historically they copied us rather than the other way around. So I'm going to vote for a flag change. I'm going to vote for blue and black. And I would have done the same if Helen Clark had proposed it, or David Longy had proposed it, or even Colin Craig had proposed it, because I just want to see the flag changed. And so I think it's become way too party political. I suspect that the status quo will win, and Labour will then campaign on a flag change in their election manifesto. So, it's a question of, like, do you want the flag to change or not? That's the only thing you should be asking yourself, and then just vote according to whatever you think.
It's a question of bad taste. Do you want a bad taste flag or something that actually looks okay?
Yep, and if that's the reason that you're voting, if you genuinely prefer the current flag to the proposals, vote for that.
Can I
it's
ask
the
you
people
something?
that want to send a message to the government or something, and it's like, well, this is actually quite an important national symbol.
If the status quo flag is retained, is it a disaster for Key, as Jane said, or is it in fact a way of the electorate letting off steam, and it mightn't be a disaster for him? What do you think?
Oh, it's definitely a big minus.
Yeah, it's like a by-election. It'll be a message, but it's not fatal.
Very good. Neil Miller and Jane Barron have been on the panel today. Very nice of both you to come on. Thank you. And thanks, everybody. Checkpoint with John Campbell now.
On behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you for joining us. Tonight, a man who set the standard for New Zealand cricket dies aged 53. Martin Crowe, one of our sporting greats. Speaking of greats, we've lost Mihina Rangi Forbes, reports from the tangi of Ranginui Walker. Also tonight, life on the Greece-Macedonia border, tense, tough and desperate. The BBC's correspondent joins us to take us there very vividly. The woman who fell from a car, we have the latest from police on her death. And 340 days in space, not long enough, according to the American astronaut. All of that and more in the next 90 minutes. But first, here's Leilani Mamoisia with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The Prime Minister is among those paying tribute to former New Zealand batsman Martin Crowe, saying his death is not only tragic for his family, but also for the country and the sport of cricket. Crowe was 53 and had suffered from lymphoma since 2012. John Campbell says Crowe touched people's hearts with his battle with leukemia and his desire to be at the opening game of last year's Cricket World Cup.
He's a New Zealander that had a fan base not only right across the country, but in fact right across the world. I think he'll be remembered for his remarkable talent, for the incredible 299 he scored against Sri Lanka, and for having the most number of centuries that a New Zealand batsman has scored.
The Prime Minister John Campbell. The New Zealand Cricket Players Association says Crowe is still regarded as the country's greatest ever batsman, and he will be greatly missed by the cricketing community here and around the world. A former teammate, John Morrison, says New Zealand cricket has lost a great, passionate player who had so much talent. Crowe first played for New Zealand at the age of 19 and had to retire in 1996 at the age of 33 because of injury. The woman who died after falling bound and gagged from a moving car in Auckland had links to organised crime. The police have named the 50-year-old Thai national as Jindarat Prutsiripon. She died in Middlemore Hospital overnight from head injuries. Residents in Papatoetoe saw her fall heavily from the boot of a car, with her hands bound and material over her mouth on Te Huia Road on Tuesday evening. Detective Inspector Dave Lynch confirms she had links to Auckland's criminal underworld.
We don't focus too much on Jindarat's background. Obviously, her family's grieving, but her background, may be relevant to the investigation. She does have some links to the organised crime world, and that will certainly form part of our investigation.
Dave Lynch says regardless of her background, Ms Prutsiripon is a victim with 2 sons, and police will treat this investigation as seriously as any other. Investigations are underway into a possible case of the sexual transmission of Zika virus in New Zealand. The Ministry of Health says a man became ill after visiting a country where the virus is active and has tested positive. His female partner, who has not recently travelled to Zika-affected country, has also tested positive. Both suffered only mild symptoms and have fully recovered. The ministry says the virus was either transmitted through unprotected sex, or the woman may have been bitten by an infected mosquito brought into the country in her partner's luggage. It says the risk to the wider public is extremely low. MPs considering whether shops should be open on Easter Sunday have been told it should be kept as a day for family. The debate over Easter Sunday trading is back before Parliament, and MPs will vote on whether councils should have the power to allow businesses to open. The bill also contains provisions that would allow any staff who don't want to work on Easter Sunday to refuse to do so. Family First New Zealand's National Director Bob McCroskey told MPs Easter is an important time for families.
Research shows that families want more time together. They're working too long, and Easter weekend is traditionally about family reunions and family holidays. This is becoming increasingly difficult as the retail industry expands and works almost every day of the year.
Bob McCroskey says if the bill goes ahead, employers will put pressure on staff to work despite the provisions. Debris, which could be from the missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, is being taken to Australia after being found on the East African coast between Mozambique and Madagascar. American, Malaysian and Australian investigators have seen photos of the object, which analysts say is apparently a horizontal stabiliser from the tail of a Boeing 777. The debris will be examined in Mozambique by Malaysian and American investigators and then sent to Australia. Flight MH370 disappeared 2 years ago, along with its 239 passengers and crew. Investigators believe it crashed in the southern Indian Ocean. And to sport, the New Zealand cricket captain Kane Williamson says he received a text message from Martin Crowe just a few days ago congratulating him on recent awards. As we told you earlier, Crowe, who is regarded by many as New Zealand's greatest cricketer, died today after a long battle with cancer. Williamson was named Sportsman of the Year at the recent Halberg Awards and also won the Sir Richard Hadley Medal for New Zealand Cricket Player of the Year. He and the other Black Caps flew out of Auckland this evening to begin preparations for the 2020 World Cup in India and says despite Crowe being ill for some time, the news is still a shock.
On Saturday, he was just congratulating me and saying some positive words throughout, I suppose, the time that he has been sick. We've had some brief contact and he's always been extremely positive and encouraging and just really sad, tough time, particularly for his family.
Black Caps captain Kane Williamson. The New Zealand men's track cycling sprint team has overcome the heartache of losing last year's world title on a technicality by reclaiming the World Championship crown in London. The New Zealand trio of Eddie Dawkins, Sam Webster and Ethan Mitchell beat the Netherlands in the final. They won the title in 2014 and crossed the line first at last year's event in Paris, only for the result to be overturned on a technicality. Mitchell says they can finally put that behind them.
The more and more we race, the more and more we prove to ourselves, especially that we are one of the top teams in the world, if not the best team in the world, obviously at the moment. So to come from last year's disappointment and to go out there and win was a big hurdle for us.
Ethan Mitchell, and that's the latest news.
A dramatic escape.
She escaped from the back of a boot. Her hands were tied up, her legs were tied up, rope around her stomach, around her neck.
Taking on gangs.
It's a whānau by whānau, community by community approach, allowing that community to say what would help them and then getting in there and delivering those resources.
And a mea culpa.
I was wrong to use those words. I don't regard those people who came to Parliament yesterday as pawns.
Action and reaction. Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espin, a morning report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, is it time for superannuation to be means tested? The Retirement Commissioner is my guest. And after 10, from human mutants to the evolution of pop music, Professor of Evolutionary Developmental Biology, Armand Lara, on using science to understand life and culture. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after morning report on RNZ National.
And the Met Service weather till midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Waikato, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Mostly fine, but a few showers in eastern areas tomorrow. Western areas from Waitomo to Kapiti, including Taumaranui and Taihape. Cloudy periods tomorrow with areas of morning drizzle. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, also Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Northern Westland and Canterbury. It's fine, isolated showers in Northern Westland and inland Canterbury tomorrow. Southern Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain from this evening with a few heavy falls. Otago and Southland, scattered rain developing this evening but mostly clearing tomorrow morning. And Chatham Islands, there's a few showers late tomorrow, and I'll be back with news headlines at 5:30. It's now 5:09.
Thank you, Leilani. We begin tonight with Martin Crowe, who died this morning from lymphoma, aged 53. For people who don't follow cricket much, Martin Crowe was special. ESPN's Crick Info, the global almanac for cricket in the 21st century wisdom, describes him as the standard by which New Zealand batsmanship would be measured, a totemic figure, and as he launched himself onto the global stage, heralded as the best young batsman in the world. Or, as RNZ's own sports editor put it, every young cricketer in their backyard wanted to be Martin Crowe. We start tonight with Rowan Quinn's report on a man who was amongst the game's true greats and somehow playing cricket as if it had been invented with him in mind.
In a golden age for New Zealand cricket, Martin Crowe got the better of the fastest, most lethal bowlers in the world. His former teammate John Morrison remembers when he took on the West Indians' strike attack in 1987 that included Curtly Ambrose and Michael Holden.
It's probably a sign of youth, but he had no fear. He'd go and carve the West Indian bowlers all over the park. Most of us would be terrified to do that because we know we'd be in for a barrage of bounces. And he made it look so damn easy, but he was very stylish. I don't mean in a sort of flashy way, it's just his poise.
And the stats back up the rarely disputed claim that Crowe was the best batsman the country's ever produced. In a Test career that spanned from 1982 to 1995, he scored 17 centuries. He had an average of more than 45 runs. His top score, 299 against Sri Lanka in 1991, also provided one of the most disappointing moments of his career when he was out just shy of a triple century. In a 2013 interview on 9 to Noon, Crowe says it was the 2 centuries at Lord's that were his biggest highlights, and as a boy he'd dreamed of playing there.
That was bliss. It's funny, you remember the applause. It's a gentle applause, and it does build, but it's very respectful, and it's and the gate swings open, and you can hear the hinges on the little swing door of the picket fence as you walk out of the pavilion onto this ground that slopes dramatically, and then you're walking into heaven's world. It's just lovely.
The cricket historian and writer Don Neely knew Martin Crowe as a child and says he was always special.
He was a corker kid. He was just a wonderful little guy, but there was none of the competitive atmosphere that there was when he was with Jeff Crowe. They couldn't play anything without trying to win it, and he was much younger, so like a lot of boys and sports players who've grown up with an older brother, the older brother drags them into the game, and then it's essential the younger guy has to excel even more so.
He says Crowe was the perfect player and he loved watching him. He says much of that was driven by a strong perfectionism.
I remember one day at Christchurch him telling me he was still angry that he'd played a shot that hadn't gone where he wanted it to go, and it was an edge, and it went down to fine leg. And he was more upset with that than being out for 70.
But the sports journalist Joseph Romanos, who published Crowe's autobiography, says he wasn't always the perfect captain. He says Crowe could be prickly and rubbed people the wrong way.
He'd not really been very empathetic with a lot of teammates, and he wished he had been. He wished he'd been better at that and a bit more chilled and mellow. But he got offside with some teammates, and so that aspect of it became difficult.
Martin Crowe learned later in life to let disputes go, saying the stress didn't help his health. He found great happiness with his wife, Lorraine Downs, and daughter Emma, who survive him. A funeral will be held in Auckland next Friday. For Checkpoint, Rowan Quinn.
As Rowan said, Martin Crowe's highest score was 299. That was against Sri Lanka at the Basin Reserve in 1991. It was the highest score ever by a New Zealander in Test cricket. Only Brendan McCullum has since surpassed it. And another record was set at the same time, a 467-run partnership with Andrew Jones. Still the highest partnership in New Zealand cricket history, still the third highest partnership in the history of all Test cricket. Andrew Jones was the other batsman involved in a stand that endures a quarter of a century later.
Look, I guess so. I just wanted to say, John, to Lorraine and Emmy, you know, how sad it is for his wife and daughter, obviously, and to Audrey, Jeff and Debbie. It's very sad news. But, yeah, look, that was just part of a special time I had. I was lucky enough to play with Martin. He was an inspiration for me, even though he's a lot younger. And yeah, that was just one of a number of great cricketing moments I can remember anyway, John.
Andrew, what was inspirational about him? Because you were older and you were a worldly player. And what was it about Martin that inspired you?
Oh, Look, he was just simply so good at the time, John. He was a master, really, in a lot of ways. He was ahead of his time, you know, for a lot of New Zealand batsmen. He was sort of probably the only guy, I think, at the time who was good enough to play county cricket back then. Look, he had a superb technique. He was as good a he was tremendous against speed, spin, whatever, and he just was such a consistent scorer of one. So you know, he was phenomenal at the time, and he continued all the way. So yeah, whether he was younger and older, he was an inspiration when I came to the team. You know, I just wanted to, you know, be half as good as him, really.
The other thing I think that so many people admired about him was that he was picked so young, and he had to overcome all the psychological issues that accompany the pressure applied to very young people. And he managed that, didn't he, formidably, singularly, by just working at it.
Well, he was a schoolboy prodigy, you've got to remember that, John. And so he came to the side young. He had some difficulties early on. He went straight to the Windies, who were just a fierce and awesome side in the mid-80s, as everybody knows. So he got knocked back. But, Marty was just an incredibly tough dude as well. For all his sort of beautiful style and whatever, he was an incredibly tough, hard worker, fit as a trout. So all those sort of things that you need to get the job done, really.
That's Andrew Jones, who featured in that 467-run partnership with Martin Crowe against Sri Lanka. That is still the third highest partnership in the entire history of Test cricket. More on Martin Crowe later in Checkpoint. The time is 17 minutes past 5. The woman who died after she fell from the boot of a car bound and gagged in South Auckland has been named as Jindirarat Prutsiripon. The 50-year-old died in Middlemore Hospital overnight after falling from a moving car on Huia Road in Papatoetoe on Tuesday. A short time ago, Detective Inspector Dave Lynch held a media conference.
Yesterday afternoon, as a result of some information that we received yesterday, we were able to identify our victim. Yesterday afternoon, our team visited her family. Obviously, they are very distressed at the news and still struggling to come to terms with what's happened to their mum.
Does she have a large family here? You said mum, so she has children.
We're still trying to, build up a picture of her family. I can say that in Auckland at the moment, she's got a couple of sons.
Has she lived here for a period of time?
I'm not sure exactly how long she's stayed here, but I believe she's a resident and she's been here for a decent period of time.
What can you tell us about, I guess, this criminal background that you seem to suggest that she has been part of?
Yeah, we don't focus too much on Jindarat's background. Obviously, her family's grieving, but her background, may be relevant to the investigation. She does have some links to the organised crime world, and that will certainly form part of our investigation.
Are those links here in New Zealand or overseas in Thailand as well?
There's links in New Zealand, and we'll certainly be investigating the extent of any other links.
Was she in a relationship, and have you spoken to that person?
We're unable to establish at this stage whether she was in any relationship. If she was, it would be a new one. Her family aren't aware of any long-term significant partner.
Detective Inspector Dave Lynch told media the police were looking at the possibility of some link to organised crime.
Well, look, it's a very real possibility, and it will form part of the investigation. She was kidnapped. Key to unravelling what's happened is why she was kidnapped and who was involved. What we believe at this early stage is that there were injuries inflicted prior to her being exiting from the vehicle as well.
That caused her death?
Well, she's got head injuries that have caused her death, and I can't really comment too much further on that other than to say that it's clear there were injuries inflicted upon her prior to her exiting the vehicle. Post-mortem was carried out today, and that was able to tell us that she did have significant head injuries, and that at least one of those injuries is likely to have been inflicted prior to her exiting the vehicle.
Any other injuries?
I'm not going to comment any further on injuries, but she died of head injuries. and there's a combination of injuries there, obviously the impact with the road and injuries that were inflicted prior to.
Any latest with the sighting of the silver sedan?
We've got very conflicting reports of the travel route of that sedan. We do have, information which is coming in from the public, which is great, and we're still just trying to work through each sighting to decide whether or not it's relevant to the investigation. Obviously, four-door silver cars are quite common, so it is quite difficult to work out, what sightings may or may not have relevance to the investigation.
CCTV footage helpful?
We're in the process of going through the cameras at the moment. It's quite a painstaking job, but it needs to be done slowly and methodically, but we're working on that as a priority.
Detective Inspector Dave Lynch talking a short time ago. A case of the Zika virus possibly being transmitted in New Zealand is being investigated by health officials. A man who visited a country where the virus is being transmitted has tested positive for Zika, but so too has his partner, who has not travelled to any Zika-affected country. Dr Don Mackey from the Ministry of Health is on the line. Thank you for joining us, Dr Mackey.
Yeah, good evening, John.
Good evening. What's most likely here in terms of how this woman contracted Zika? Do you think it's sexual transmission in New Zealand?
There's a couple of options which we're looking at here, John. The first is sexual transmission, and the second one is whether one of the type of mosquito that transmits the virus came back in his luggage and was able to bite her. So there's two possibilities. We're working to investigate the mosquito possibility. There's been inspection of the area where they live. There are traps out for mosquitoes there. But we also know that, as I say, he had the Zika virus and the virus has been detected in his semen. So that raises that other possibility.
OK, how easy is sexual transmission?
There's a lot we don't know yet, John. This is something that's new to us, but it seems to be really quite rare. In terms of what's reported so far, there's 8 cases internationally reported of sexually transmitted Zika. To put that in context, in Brazil alone, there's 1.4 million cases. So the vast majority of transmission is by mosquitoes still.
Okay.
It raises an issue, yeah.
Yeah, it does. It raises an issue about biosecurity too. I mean, you can't prejudge this because we simply don't know if a mosquito is responsible. But if one is, somehow a mosquito got alive into the country.
Yeah, and we know that from time to time we do see incursions of the mosquitoes, and they're normally picked up by the very tight border controls that we have with traps and like at border. The other thing is these mosquitoes don't live for very long, and their range is very limited. I'm advised that the range of the mosquitoes is about 20 metres or so. Right. So and they just don't live long in New Zealand. So we're pretty comfortable that mosquito transmission in New Zealand remains a very, very remote possibility. But the question of sexual transmission sort of raises questions. So we're giving some quite comprehensive advice with the best information that we have on how people should handle that.
And Dr Mackey, one final question. What sort of condition are these people in? Are they okay?
Oh, both of them had a mild illness and both have now fully recovered.
Dr Don Mackey from the Ministry of Health, thank you so much for your time this evening. It is 23 and a half minutes past 5 on Checkpoint. Coming up on the programme, tens of thousands of refugees head towards Greece's border with Macedonia. Our correspondent is there, a vivid account of life such as it is in one town. And the Breakers touched down in Auckland after an all-night flight from Perth following their game against the Wildcats. They've got just 24 hours before their next game here in Auckland. This is a mad schedule. We discuss it with their coach. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. Particularly tonight, any tributes for Martin Crowe. Doesn't matter whether you met him or whether you just loved his cricket from afar. Text 2101, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, Facebook and Twitter, Checkpoint RNZ. The world is now so used to reports of refugees in makeshift camps, an uncertain future but a hopeless past, that the scale of the crisis on Greece's border with Macedonia is not attracting much attention, but it is very real. Aid workers say the situation at one small border town in northern Greece could easily spin out of control as more and more refugees arrive and the border remains closed to almost all of them. Can't go forward, won't go back. The aid is stretched, there aren't enough tents, tempers are fraying. The BBC's Danny Savage is there and this is what he's seen.
Well, going up to the border today between Greece and Macedonia, there's some 10,000 people crammed in to two large fields. It looks like a summer rock festival, but minus the fun. There's lots of tiny multicoloured tents spread across this area. And it's the sort of tents that you and I would maybe spend one night in on a summer's night. But there's whole families living in these tents at the moment, and there are thousands of them. And their attention is focused on this one metal gate, which they need to pass through to get through to Macedonia. And that gate isn't opening very often. So this huge backlog of people is building up. And what you're finding is an enormous increase, really, in the number of women and children at this site at the moment. So you're finding little kids running around this field, not getting food a lot of the time because they're not the ones queuing for it. And it's pretty sad. And the number of tents has run out as well. So the supplies have run low. People can't get tents. And what you're finding is young families sitting out in the cabbage fields of northern Greece, trying to sort of keep safe, keep warm, but actually they're exposed to the elements.
What will a win look like for these people? This is a hopeless situation for them. How are they possibly going to move on?
Their hope is that they somehow get through this border gate up to Macedonia and move up the migrant trail. But the reality is that it's happening so slowly that they're going to be stuck at this border crossing for days, if not weeks. I did a quick calculation today and worked out that if people cross this border at the current rate that they're doing, that this one border camp is going to take 2 months to clear. And that's before anybody else joins the back of the queue. And you've got to remember that migrants from Syria and Iraq are coming into this country by their thousands every day. We were up at a border camp away a few miles from the border where the army have put up thousands of tents. And people were turning up in buses from Athens today, from Syria and Iraq, after making that perilous boat journey across the Aegean Sea. And they were just getting off the bus and walking up the road towards the border because they all want to be at the border. They all want to feel as though they're at the front of the queue. But at the front of that queue, it's desperate, it's fraught. There was fights breaking out today among the migrants. All they've got to do is sit around and wait. And they're sitting on top of each other in a very small space. Tempers are fraying, people are losing their temper, and children are having to run for cover because of fights breaking out.
Danny, the Macedonian government, of course, it's an almost impossible position for them because there is intense domestic pressure saying don't let them in. There are the people themselves desperate to be let in. There is Europe and then the eyes of the world. How are they responding?
The Macedonian authorities say they are merely passing on policy from other countries up the migrant route. You've got to remember that here in Europe, just before Christmas, there was a united policy to deal with this migrant crisis, effectively moving people up through the continent towards Germany, which is the one country that has its doors open to the migrants and says it will take them. However, they have to pass through many countries to get there. One of those countries is Austria. It's limited the number of migrants that can pass through its borders daily to 3,200 a day. That's causing a backlog further down. It's already caused several countries to say, you know what, we're not going to let Afghans in. So it's only Syrians and Iraqis going up this long trail through the Balkan countries. So you're in a pretty desperate situation if you're not a Syrian or an Iraqi. I was in Athens the other day, a whole square in a city centre full of Afghans living rough, men, women and children. There were trees surrounding that square, strong trees that two men decided to try and hang themselves from because they were so desperate in their situation. So as far as Greece is concerned, as far as Afghans are concerned, Greece is a dead end to them, whereas for Syrians and Iraqis there is hope. But people are crossing the borders so slowly. But what's going to happen here? There's going to be a huge build-up of migrants in the coming weeks, potentially 100,000 people here. And there's already talk of this being a humanitarian crisis. The UN is warning that this is an impending humanitarian crisis. You talk to the aid agencies in this country, they say there already is one.
It's Danny Savage, the BBC's correspondent, who was filing from right near that Greece-Macedonia border. An extraordinary first-hand account from the man who is there. Leilani is standing by with news headlines, but just before we go to them, in a best-of-3 final series to find the top basketball team in Australasia, Auckland's Breakers are now 1-0 down after a narrow loss to the Perth Wildcats in Perth last night. Score 82-76. The teams play the second game in Auckland tomorrow night. The Breakers have to win that, obviously. But to play it at all, they had to go straight from the Perth arena last night, directly to the airport, catch 2 flights through the night to get a 5,500 kilometres back home. 2 games in 48 hours with that travel in between. That's almost ridiculously tight. I discussed it with Breakers coach Dean VICKERMAN just after they landed at Auckland Airport a couple of hours ago.
Yeah, no, we took the 11:30 flight out of Perth and flew straight to Sydney. And not a huge delay there, but just arrived in Auckland at just after 3 o'clock, and we're on a bus on the way home to our training venue to just get a little bit more recovery.
And are you guys up the front? Do you get lie flats? Are you luxuriating and sleeping while you're flying home?
Air New Zealand took very good care of us on the Sydney to Auckland flight, and we're very appreciative of them upgrading us to business class.
Okay, that makes a difference, doesn't it? And then you have to play tomorrow night. You're going to win at home because that's what you do. And then you have to go back to Perth immediately and play there Sunday afternoon. This is kind of mad, isn't it, Dean?
Yeah, it is kind of mad. It's the only final series in the league this year that's been put on such a tight time schedule. And, obviously the reasonings for it was to try and find a window to fit in between the football codes with the TV schedule, but it doesn't really look after players' welfare very well.
Very well at all. In fact, I would say it's simply not looking after player welfare. How are they? How do you prepare them, having flown through the night after a defeat, tough game, tough defeat? How do you prepare them to play again tomorrow when they have to win?
Yeah, this is a group that, anytime we take a loss on the road, we feel it for a little bit, and by the time we arrive in Auckland, everyone's, either watched some game tape or process the game in their own minds, and, we always kind of end up in Auckland in quite a happy place, and, everyone's quite cheery at the moment, and, we're looking forward to the game. We were close, last night, and, but, just that difference of being at home and, and knowing it's a sudden death game, and we've been great in those situations.
Yeah, you have.
Anytime our back's against the wall.
Yeah, your backs are against the wall tomorrow night because it's sudden death for you guys. You have to win. The game sold out, it's my understanding, in about 2 minutes. That crowd will lift you, won't they?
Yeah, they were amazing last year for the Cairns final, and you could feel it as soon as you walked in the venue, and I'm so looking forward to feeling that atmosphere again. And our crowd loves the match-up against the Wildcats, and they'll get after it.
Good luck, Dean, and we hope it goes really well.
Thanks, John.
Dean VICKERMAN, the Breakers coach. Coming up on Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet live in Fiji to describe a pretty amazing boat trip he's just had. And who should decide if businesses can open on Easter Sunday. All that and much more in the next half hour. But first, here's Leilani Mamoisa with the headlines.
The Prime Minister is among those paying tribute to former New Zealand batsman Martin Crowe, saying his death at the age of 53 is not only tragic for his family, but also for the country and for cricket. John Key says Crowe touched people's hearts with his battle with cancer and his desire to be at the opening game of last year's Cricket World Cup. The New Zealand Cricket Players Association says Crowe is still regarded as this country's greatest ever batsman, and he will be greatly missed by the cricketing community here and around the world. The police say the woman who died after falling bound and gagged from a moving car in Auckland had links to organised crime. They've named the 50-year-old Thai national as Jindarat Prutsirapon. She died in Middlemore Hospital overnight from head injuries, some of which the police say were inflicted before she fell. Ms Prutsirapon had 2 sons. Investigations are underway into a possible case of the sexual transmission of Zika in New Zealand. The Ministry of Health says a man became ill after visiting a country where the virus is active and tested positive. His woman partner, who has not travelled to a Zika-affected country recently, also tested positive. The ministry says the risk to the wider public is extremely low. Family First has told MPs considering whether shops should be open on Easter Sunday that it should be kept as a day for family. The debate over Easter Sunday trading is back before Parliament, and MPs will vote on whether councils should have the power to allow businesses to open. Debris that could be from the missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 is being taken to Australia after being found on the East African coast between Mozambique and Madagascar. And it's 5:35.
Thanks, Leilani. We are in Fiji in a moment, then looking at the subject of Sunday trading during the Easter weekend. But let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier. And Nona, you are sitting beside me with news of a bumper day for the share market.
You bet. We had a good day yesterday, and today the momentum continued. So we saw a record intraday high, so that's through the middle of the day. We hit a new record, and then we finished on a new record as well. So the close was 68 points up. That's 1%. The Australian market was also up about 1% this afternoon. The Asian markets are hanging on to their gains. Yeah, everything's looking up.
So the NZSE is at record highs, not record highs, a record high.
A record.
Wow.
Yeah, a record high.
Why?
Well, it's because, I guess a lot of reasons. For one thing, the New Zealand market didn't fall as much as some of the other markets around the world through the first couple of months of the year where there was a lot of volatility. And partly that's because we have had very positive economic indicators, and we've just been through a corporate reporting season that put the smile on the face of quite a lot of shareholders because the results were quite positive overall, and the companies here pay quite good dividends. And for, an aging population, fixed income, looking for good, solid revenue, a dividend that pays a high yield is pretty good in a low interest rate environment. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why we are seeing very good underlying strength in our market.
Right, you've spoken to someone about this, right?
I certainly have. I've spoken to a few people about it, but I spoke with the head of wealth research at Craig's Investment Partners, that's Mark Lister, and he had something to say about why the New Zealand companies are attractive.
By and large, I think it is a time for people being quite defensive and a little bit cautious and focusing on better quality companies with strong cash flows, because I think we are going into a genuinely more difficult period. What makes that difficult is that all of those types of companies are the ones that are looking more expensive, which means they have less upside, so to speak. So the New Zealand market is looking pretty tough because we've been pretty much immune to all of the volatility offshore, and our market hasn't really pulled back at all. So it's really difficult to find value locally.
Mark Lister from Craig's Investment. So looking at all of that, we know what the NZSE did. What else happened today?
Well, we had some business indicators, so I don't know how much time we have, but basically building put in place, so that's building that's underway, reached another record high, 26-year high, so that went along with a record high we saw in new car registrations yesterday. That was a 32-year high, so still a lot of positive indicators, and that's really reflected in our market. We rose more than 1% today, closing that 68 points up to 6,381, our new record, and our dollar was 68.8 US cents and 91.4 Australian.
Nona Peltier, our Auckland business reporter, thank you so much. Nona, 22 minutes to 6. To Fiji now, where Radio New Zealand international reporter Alex Perrottet has just returned from Vanua Balavu, the third largest island, Fiji's Lau archipelago, where 5 people lost their lives. Alex was looking at being stuck there for another week after Fiji Airways cancelled his flight. But then he managed to get on a boat back to Suva. Alex, thank you for joining us. Whose boat were you on? Are you on? You're still on it?
Well, this is a government boat. Yes, we're still here. We're just mooring here at Suva, and this is called the MV Tangivo. It's a government ship carrying disaster aid officials, as well as people who want to get back. We've got two very heavily pregnant women. One's got contractions. There's a doctor here monitoring her because the hospital there is not good enough at the moment, as you can imagine. I've got with me Commander Humphrey Tawake. He's actually from Vanua Balevu, and his village of Mualevu was totally wiped out. I saw the destruction and just moved by it, really amazing. And he's in charge of the whole aid mission to the Lao group. Now, Commander, there was a bit of a false start, really, with lots of tents not being able to get to people who needed them, but you've assured us that that's on the way now.
Yes, thank you. I think the level of devastation and the assessment that were being assessed on the ground, it will match what we had anticipated, but now that we are fully aware of the assessment that has been done, I think that is one of the priorities that we could address immediately.
And you're talking about people being in tents now for up to 2 years, and you want good ones.
Oh yes, that's the priority, because tarpaulins is not good enough. Probably tents that would last from 6 months to 2 years because of the level of devastation. Some families live in one household, has got 2 families, 3 families. So those are some of the considerations that we should have.
We're talking about 50%, John, 50% of Fiji needing to be rebuilt. That's the task that we're looking at here.
Yeah, Alex, that's amazing. Alex, the boat is really noisy. Can you whack that mic up under your mouth? You're doing it. This is extraordinary that you are live streaming. Yeah, that's brilliant. You're live streaming to us from a boat as it arrives in Suva. So the boat is an aid boat, but it's bringing people back. Have you got people who need hospital care on that boat with you?
Right now, we could have an extra member on the ship because the lady is about to give birth, but we're also taking bottles and bottles of water. The Wellington was taking water to us. We were visiting islands, huge bags of flour and rice, and also all the damage assessment teams, representatives from every ministry here, from energy to education. We've had all sorts of people, and now they're here in Suva, ready to give their assessment report to the PM's office.
Okay, Alex, we'd like full details on that baby if it's going to be born with you right there on the boat as you arrive in Suva. What wonderful news. Thanks, Alex. Alex Perrottet live as they sail into Suva on a boat that's just returned from Vanua Balevu, where 5 people lost their lives doing great aid work right throughout the outer islands now. The Fijian military, the New Zealand military, all the NGOs really have swung into action. Turning now to the topic of Easter trading. On Easter Sunday, most shops and restaurants are shut, but a law change is being considered in Parliament that would change this. We asked people on the streets of Auckland what they thought about that idea.
Well, they shouldn't be there because we're on holiday. We should have it. It's good for the economy too, either way.
I don't think they should be closed. Not all of them anyway. Because people like to go out on Easter for like lunch and stuff.
I'm not sure, to be honest. Haven't really thought about it.
Yes, I think big department stores and things should close. Restaurants shouldn't have to. But there's some things that are needed all the weekend, all Easter weekend.
Oh no, they should stay open.
Why?
Oh, because I work during the week and I shop on a Saturday.
Local councils are backing the bill which would allow businesses to open on Easter Sunday, but they want the government to set rules, not them. The bill would give local authorities the ability to create bylaws to allow businesses in their area to open on Easter Sunday. Councils, Hospitality New Zealand and community organisations appeared before a parliamentary select committee today to have their say. Gemma Brackybush was there.
At present, only businesses in Taupo and Queenstown can legally open on Easter Sunday, but some flout the rules. Northland District Council's Mayor John Carter says all tourist areas should have the same rights because inconsistencies are a nightmare.
In Paihia, the businesses carry on. In Russell, just across the water, they can't, and it's nuts. I was going to exaggerate a bit and say that we have this problem that we have a ferry that runs between Paihia and Russell, and people can shop halfway across, and then they've got to jump off and swim across because they're not allowed to work.
But John Carter says if councils create bylaws just for their area, it will just lead to more inconsistency and leave taxpayers footing the bill.
The cost will be somewhere between $60,000 and $300,000, depending on what objections and so on that we get. Now, you then multiply that across the nation, and suddenly you are talking a lot of ratepayers' money.
Marlborough District Council's lawyer Peter Radich says businesses in his region want the right to meet visitor demands over Easter.
It's not easy to get food and sustenance in Marlborough on Good Friday and Easter Sunday, and it's commonplace for people to complain that why on earth do we invite them to Marlborough and then find the place closed down.
Hospitality New Zealand expressed its long-held view that businesses should have the option to open on Easter Sunday, but not all submitters agreed. Bob McCroskey, the National Director for Family First New Zealand, says as people's lives get busier, other than taking annual leave, Easter is one of the few occasions for family time out.
Research shows that families want more time together. They're working too long, and Easter weekend is traditionally about family reunions and family holidays. This is becoming increasingly difficult as the retail industry expands and works almost every day of the year.
A Labour MP on the Commerce Committee, Ian Lees-Galloway, says if the changes do go ahead, the government should take responsibility.
If they want shops to open on Easter Sunday, then the government should have the guts to actually make that decision for themselves, not to kick it off to councils and not to create additional costs for ratepayers and additional hassle for councils who will have to develop these policies and bylaws.
The bill also contains a provision that would allow any staff who don't want to work on Easter Sunday to refuse to do so. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Gemma Brackybush.
Let's head to AKAROA now, where the residents are fed up with Freedom Campers. Well, maybe not with Freedom Campers, but with the toilet facilities they're using. They say toilet facilities at French Farm are simply not enough for the increasing number of picnickers and more in particularly Freedom Campers who are using them. Resident Chris GOLDSPINK said over Waitangi weekend he counted 47 vehicles, most with at least 2 occupants, some with quite a few parked up, few of them with toilet facilities. I asked him how big the current toilet block is and who it was originally put in for.
So it's quite old. I would say that it was probably initially installed in the 1970s. There are just 2 toilets in the block, a male and a female. Would have been originally built to support picnickers on the foreshore here and probably the odd contractor driving past. So it has what appears to be a simple withholding tank that is around about 2,000 litres in capacity.
Okay, so if there are sometimes as many as 50 Freedom camping vehicles there and they contain 1, 2, 3, maybe even more people, let's say there's 100 people there on the really busy nights, is that facility and the storage tank equipped to cope with that many users?
Well, clearly not. So if you do the sums, an average toilet flush is conservatively 10 litres. If each of those people are using that facility once in the evening and once in the morning, then the numbers, even for the average over some of the more and less busy periods, is somewhere between 1,200 litres a day and around 2,000 litres a day.
So unless they're emptying it every day, you have trouble?
That's correct.
And are they emptying it every day?
No, they had a maintenance schedule which seems to have been in place from the old days when there were only 5 people a week using it, which involved pumping it out twice a year. And I think they were roughly 3 months apart, so during the summer season, effectively.
Okay, so now there is real overflow, is there?
Well, yeah.
And where's it go to?
When you do the maths, you're looking at something like, conservatively, because I'm just calculating this number on toilet flushes, but there's actually also a dump there for self-contained vehicles. Now, no one knows how much volume goes through that, but it goes through the same tank. So in addition to the sewage coming from the toilets, we've got chemically treated waste and grey water coming in from camper vans, and it's got to be 200 to 300,000 litres a year, and yet they've been physically removing just 4,000 litres a year.
Right, you guys have had enough of this and you've been blowing the whistle in a big way. What response have you had? What's happened today?
Well, we've been raising concerns actually for some years about the toilet because none of us were entirely convinced as to what was going on there. But whenever we've raised those concerns, and in my case, after we'd had a particularly busy time, the Waitangi weekend, that whole area stunk. And I contacted council and brought that to their attention. They got back to me within 24 hours and said they'd had someone go down there and everything was fine. And it was only after a following a further conversation with someone from council where they indicated that they only pumped it twice a year, that I then sat down and did the numbers.
Okay, so what's happening now?
What's happening now, we brought this to the attention of council on Tuesday. We took a group, all of the compliance officers from council, down there and showed them the situation on Tuesday evening. We had an undertaking that, from a public health point of view, that they would immediately respond and close the area off. Nothing happened yesterday. Yesterday we had another group of people camping down there. There were 23 cars, I think, 40 people. We watched as a man went in the water and came out from swimming in it, near to the discharge point. So we were not happy. We went down and spoke with the people camping there and just made them aware of a potential health concern. And we did get a response this morning. Council arrived with 4 portaloos and they closed off the toilets and the dump, and put up a couple of signs warning of potential hazard near the outfall. We have continued to put pressure on and insisted that until we know the extent of the contamination and the extent of the risk, that area should be closed off from public use, and certainly by the very large numbers of campers that tend to use it. And I believe they have now asked the person who's got the delegation to authorise that to do so.
9.5 minutes to 6. Lovely feedback coming in on Martin Crowe. This is one we really want to share with you. As a 6-year-old in 1992, Martin Crowe and the Young Guns changed my life as I witnessed their unlikely run to the semi-finals. That's the Cricket World Cup in 92, of course. From that moment, I have suffered the tragedy of cricket fanaticism. Martin's captaincy and batting during that World Cup changed the game. Go well, Marty, who was 6 in 1992. Sorry, go well, Marty, says Simon, who was 6 in 1992. So he must be about 30 now. Lovely, lovely message. Thank you, Simon. Martin Crowe scored a century, I think, in that opening game against Australia at Eden Park, which put New Zealand, bang, we beat the Aussies in that game. And Dean Jones, who was a great Australian cricketer, has just heard the news of Martin Crowe's passing. Brilliant player and ambassador for our game. Sympathies to Jeff, Marty's big brother, of course, and the family. That from Dean Jones. Right, the mountain guide who escaped a fatal icefall that killed 3 climbers on Aoraki Mount Cook says he told them he was abandoning the climb because the conditions were too dangerous and because he was sick. Now, a coroner has ruled that the 3 overseas climbers who died did so after they were buried under an avalanche. Eric Frickberg has more details.
Guide Dave McKinley says the decision by the other climbers to press on with the climb was one for them to make, not him or anyone else. The consequences were fatal. In December 2014, the avalanche claimed the lives of Johann Wilner from Germany, his son Raphael, and Michael Bishop from Australia. Their bodies have never been found and lie buried under several metres of snow. The Dunedin coroner, David Crerar, has ruled the 3 died of suffocation or asphyxia or traumatic injury after tons of ice collapsed from a notorious area of the mountain known as the Gun Barrels. A veteran mountain guide, Dave McKinley, who turned back with a client before the accident, says this area can be deadly.
The Gun Barrels are overhanging ice cliffs. They hang there for large periods of time, and when they do release, they release massive, like thousands of tons of ice into the areas affected.
Dave McKinley says this would have triggered a large secondary avalanche, burying the bodies under 5 to 7 metres of snow and ice. He was in the first rescue party to reach the area after the accident, but it was too dangerous then and now to try to get the bodies out. He adds he'll never be able to say for sure whether or not his illness pushed him over the threshold of calling off the climb and effectively saving his life, nor should he have directed the other climbers on what they should do.
Every person is different, and they have the right to continue with their own game plan. So it was communicated. I did mention to them that I was turning back. It is too warm. I don't have the right, and I don't think anyone has the right to give another person a directive on what they ought to do in the mountains.
Dave McKinley adds he's climbed the world's highest peak and says Aoraki Mount Cook deserves just as much care.
I have absolutely absolutely as much respect and caution in my approach to Mount Cook, Aoraki, as I have for Everest. It is a very serious place, and it's a very rewarding place to go and play and recreate, but the seriousness of it is absolutely right up there.
In his report, the coroner, David Crerar, said although the bodies hadn't been recovered, he had no doubt that the deaths had occurred because the trio hadn't used their passports or bank cards after they were last seen. The coroner added the three might have been experienced climbers but may have been unaware of special conditions in New Zealand mountains, where warmer than usual air can make avalanches more likely. For Checkpoint, Eric Frickberg.
Let's go to Pitcairn Island, where two members of that tiny Pacific Island community took about 45 minutes to find their former mayor had indecent material in his possession. Judge Arthur Tompkins, a New Zealander, of course, agreed with their findings and will sentence Michael Warren on Saturday morning. Our Auckland court reporter Edward Gay has been covering this case as it's been beamed into the British Consulate's office in downtown Auckland from Pitcairn itself. We discussed the details last night, Eddie, but what we didn't discuss. So these two people were effectively a tiny jury, right? Permanent population of Pitcairn is 50, so that's 4% of the population. This is a close community.
And they were, and I guess they were warned by that by Judge Tompkins, you know, who said, you two men have a lot of dealings with Mr. Warren on almost a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely.
probably. But you know, you've got to put that aside as you decide this case.
So what did they decide he was guilty of? What is he now guilty of?
Well, he's guilty of these two indecent charges. One of them, a sex chat with a person who purported to be this 15-year-old schoolgirl in England. Another of a video of a bound and gagged naked woman who the Crown says was highly likely to have been seriously injured after this video was made. The judge said that these two men, this mini jury, if you like, represented the right-minded members of the Pitcairn community. And he said it was their job to determine whether or not these two items found on Warren's computer were grossly obscene. The two jurors, if you like, or assessors as they're called on Pitcairn, after they heard this short summing up, they walked across the Adamstown Square to the Secretary's office on the other side of the square, and they didn't take long to come back.
45 minutes.
About 45.
And Judge Tompkins, who's a New Zealander who's been hearing the case both here in Auckland and up in Pitcairn, agreed with them?
That's right, he did. He straight away he thanked them for their finding and said that he had reached the same finding himself. He will be sentencing Michael Warren on Saturday, and as well as these two charges, of course he's been also found guilty of 20 other charges. They relate to the possession of the child's sex images and videos found on Warren's computers and hard drives and CDs as well. I phoned the mayor of Pitcairn, the current mayor of Pitcairn, to find out how those verdicts have been received on the island. I spoke to his wife, and she referred me to the island's administrator, Alan Richmond, but he says that they won't be commenting before the sentencing.
Edward Gay, thank you so much, Edward. Our court reporter, Edward Gay, with the latest on that case in Pitcairn, the former mayor of the islands. It's 2.5 minutes before 6. NASA astronaut Scott Kelly and Russian cosmonaut Mikhail Kornienko have returned to Earth after nearly a year on the International Space Station. It's the longest US space mission on record, and it's hoped it's paved the way for human travel to Mars for anyone who's interested in that prospect. Scott Kelly says while 340 days in space seems like a long time, believe it or not, given a choice, he'd have stayed longer.
It was, leaving the space station was bittersweet. I've been there a long time, so I look forward to leaving. But at the same time, it's a magnificent place, and I'm going to miss it. So, mixed emotions, I guess. We have been saying to each other, we did it, but it's really not about us. I mean, there's a lot of, thousands of people that go into this, and their jobs are just as important because it's kind of like a link in a chain. If you break one of them, the chain breaks. So everyone's important in doing something this complicated. I felt like I had been up there my whole life. After about the first 6 months, which is like the normal increment. The normal increment is about 6 months, and that's a long time. So a year is really, really long. But I'm definitely encouraged on our ability to go even longer. I mean, I kind of, even though I look forward to coming home and there's things that I miss, I felt like if it was for the right reason, I clearly could have stayed, however long it took.
Scott Kelly, 340 days in space, says he could have done more of it. We had the story from AKAROA about freedom campers who are using the two loos there. There's way too many freedom campers for the loos, which have a storage tank to cope, and so it's leaking into French Farm, the bay there. Overcrowding at designated freedom camping sites, says David Barnes, shows that campers want to camp legitimately. Good point. The range of permitted sites needs to increase. Prohibition won't work. It just drives them to illicit sites, usually without toilets. A very sensible piece of feedback from David Barnes, and they have put in 4 portaloos there, so the local council has finally responded to address the demand. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint. I'm John Campbell, 30 minutes to go in the program tonight. Thank you for being with us. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, Friends pay tribute to Martin Crowe. A very moving interview coming up. Strong aftershocks rock Indonesia after last night's large quake. People talk about the Ring of Fire, which is that sort of horseshoe that does the Pacific Rim. We're going to discuss this with a man who knows all about it. Why is it so busy at present, or is it always this busy? And the little girl whose birthday presents literally went to the dogs. All that and more coming up. But first, here's the news with Leilani Mamoisia.
Kia ora, good evening. The Prime Minister, administrators and fellow cricketers have been paying tribute to former New Zealand batsman Martin Crowe. Crowe was 53 and had suffered from lymphoma since 2012. John Key says his death is not only tragic for his family, but also for the country and the sport of cricket. Cricket Australia's Chief Executive, James Sutherland, says Crowe was a revolutionary thinker and will be missed by cricket fans all over the world. Don Neely, a cricket historian who knew Martin Crowe, says he was always competitive and together with his older brother Jeff, always played to win.
He just looked so different from all the other people he played with, and also when he played against great players, he just had something that looked, this guy is special.
Mr Neely says Crowe was a perfectionist who would sometimes agonise over a shot that did not go according to plan. The New Zealand Cricket Players Association says Crowe is still regarded as this country's greatest ever batsman. Martin Crowe's funeral will be held at Auckland's Holy Trinity Cathedral on Friday next week. The woman who died after falling bound and gagged from a moving car in Auckland had links to organised crime. The police have named the 50-year-old Thai national as Jindarat Pritsurapon. She died in Middlemore Hospital overnight from head injuries. Residents in Papatoetoe saw her falling heavily from the boot of a car with her hands bound and material over her mouth on Te Huia Road on Tuesday evening. Detective Inspector Dave Lynch confirms Ms Prutsiripon had links to Auckland's criminal underworld, but he says regardless of her background, she is a victim with 2 sons and the police will treat this investigation as seriously as any other. Investigations are underway into a possible case of the sexual transmission of Zika virus in New Zealand. The Ministry of Health says a man tested positive for the virus after visiting a country where the mosquito-borne disease is active and may have transmitted it to his partner upon his return. Adriana Webber reports.
The man's partner, who hadn't travelled with him or to any other Zika-affected country, also tested positive for the virus. The ministry says the virus could have been transmitted through unprotected sex, or the woman could have been bitten by an infected mosquito brought into the country in her partner's luggage. The ministry is reassuring people that the risk to the wider public is extremely low. It says the couple only suffered mild symptoms and made a full recovery. This is Adriana Webber.
An urgent request has been made to the Christchurch City Council to close down 2 freedom camping sites because the toilets can't cope with the large numbers of visitors. Residents in AKAROA say the French Farm Freedom camping site is attracting up to 100 campers a night, and this has caused the septic tank to overflow into the harbour. Banks Peninsula Ward Councillor Andrew Turner says portaloos have been taken to French Farm today to deal with the pressure on infrastructure there and at the Wainui camping site.
We've got situations there which clearly are health and safety risk, which have got impacts on the environment, the environmental health and so on. And we're already aware of some traffic issues which have been caused by the sheer numbers of freedom campers.
Andrew Turner says the bylaw may need to be changed to restrict numbers at sites. Cardinal George Pell has admitted to Australia's Royal Commission into Child Abuse that he didn't act quickly enough on information that a priest was abusing boys in the 1970s. Australia's highest-ranked Catholic was a priest in Ballarat when he was told by a schoolboy in 1973 that Father Ted Dolan was abusing boys. The admission came as the Commission of Inquiry's chair, Justice Peter McClellan, quizzed Cardinal Pell about his response to being told of the priest's behaviour.
Well, you didn't go straight to the school and say, I've got this allegation, what's going on?
No, I didn't.
Should you have?
With the experience of 40 years later, certainly I would agree that I should have done more.
Justice Peter McClellan questioning Cardinal Pell about child abuse in Ballarat. The police are investigating how a man fell into a creek on Auckland's North Shore and ended up in hospital. Work was being done on widening the creek to prevent floods in the area, but the creek has been the subject of an ongoing dispute and the police have been called to the scene several times before. They say a security guard and contractors were at the site this morning when the injured man threw things, including a piece of wood, in the direction of the workers. The security guard intervened and the man ended up in the creek. The police spokesperson said the event was recorded on a cell phone. The man's in a stable condition. Into sport now, New Zealand Cricket says it will discuss with Martin Crowe's family the best way for the cricket fraternity to remember a player regarded by many as New Zealand's greatest cricketer. As we told you earlier, Crowe died today in Auckland after a long battle with cancer. The Chief Executive of New Zealand Cricket, David White, says they want to give Crowe's family time to grieve.
Our hearts go out to his family and his close friends. And over the next few days and weeks, we're going to celebrate his life and his outstanding contribution to New Zealand and world cricket. But for us, it's a time for sad reflection.
The Chief Executive of New Zealand Cricket, David White. The New Zealand cyclist Ethan Mitchell says it's nice to know they're the best in the world again, just a few months out from the Rio Olympics. The men's sprint team of Mitchell, Sam Webster and Eddie Dawkins reclaimed their World Championship title in London this morning, beating the Netherlands in the final. The trio won the world title in 2014 and crossed the line first at last year's World Champs in Paris, only for the result to be overturned on a technicality and relegated to second. After 8 years with the Wellington Phoenix, defender Manny Muscat is returning home, having signed a 2-year deal with Melbourne City. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Cologne, after the attacks. Through the eyes of long-time resident Gabi Hufschmidt. Have they changed how she lives? Have they changed how Germany responds to migrants? We have a window on the world of Pakistan's Christian refugees, somehow stranded in Thailand. And this week's cultural ambassador, Fergus Barrowman, shares some new jazz releases, including the latest from Roger Fox. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And the Met Service weather till midnight tomorrow: Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Waikato, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Mostly fine, but a few showers in eastern areas tomorrow. Western areas from Waitomo to Kapiti, including Taumaranui and Taihape. Cloudy periods tomorrow with areas of morning drizzle. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, also Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Northern Westland and Canterbury. Fine, isolated showers in Northern Westland and inland Canterbury tomorrow. Southern Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain from this evening with a few heavy falls. Otago and Southland, scattered rain developing this evening, but mostly clearing tomorrow morning. And the Chatham Islands has a few showers late tomorrow. And it's 6:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Leilani. Have a lovely evening. Tributes are pouring in, of course, for Martin Crowe, who died this morning after battling lymphoma. He was 53. Now, for people who don't know much about cricket, Martin Crowe really was special. 77 tests for New Zealand, 17 centuries, an average of 45, and something wonderful about the way he played the game. The former All Black, Grant Fox, met Martin Crowe at Auckland Grammar, where they became fast friends, and Grant is on the line now. Grant, I know you must be shattered by this today. We're so grateful for you joining us.
It's a pleasure, John.
Yeah, lovely to talk to you. I'm sorry it's in these circumstances.
Yeah, it's been a tough day.
Yeah, I bet it has. He was your mate. You met him at school.
Yeah, he was my mate, exactly.
Yeah. So were you in the same year at Grammar, Foxy?
We were, John, we were, yeah. We met on a pew in the Assembly Hall in February 1976. Can't remember exactly what day, but it was February. So we had a little celebration lunch, February just gone, to celebrate 40 years as mates with a butter chicken pie, a glass of malt beer and a red wine. It was a lovely, lovely day.
Oh, I bet it was. God, I'm thrilled you did that. You similar characters in a way, although I mean, no, that's not true. You're similar sportsmen in a way, because you both worked very hard at being as good as you could possibly be and trained in a singular fashion. Did you greatly admire that about him?
Oh, yeah, he had all the traits of what he was a genius. I wasn't a genius. I was a hard worker. He was a genius. I mean, look, he was driven and he was intense and he was focused. The thing that set us apart probably is he was much more emotional than me. And I think geniuses are emotional. They wear their heart on their sleeve, and they're a bit different. And Marty certainly was that. I mean, you know, I've probably told you this story, and I've said it a couple of times today because I have done a little bit of media work. But you know, as 18-year-olds, when we left Auckland Grammar, so 5 years later in 1980, we had a bet. We shook hands and brash, arrogant young schoolboys are who's going to play the most test matches for their country at their chosen sport. Well, you know, of course, it was a pipe dream. I thought Marty was more likely to than me. He might get a number, I'd probably get none. But he ended up with 77, I ended up with 46. So he won the bet on the numbers game. But I've got this marvellous print on my games room wall. It's of Lords, and there's an inscription on it written by Martin that says, "To Foxy, we both won Hogan." And it's very special to me.
Yeah, and isn't that typical of him to acknowledge that, to remember and to celebrate your mutual success?
Very thoughtful. I mean, the side of Marty that people don't know, and of course they're not, because they wouldn't, because it's the private side, and we know what the sports, and we saw the genius that he was, and we all went through the ups and downs, and they were mostly ups, but you know, he's a very kind, compassionate, generous man, and in the last couple of years, despite what he was battling, his thought was always for others. It was incredible, really. I mean, how he and Lorraine, the dignity with which they went through this and how they coped and their strength of character, their strength of their partnership was just, it amazed me. Incredible, really. And, you know, he was faced with the innings of his life, really, because that's what it was. It was about his life. And he never gave up, and he fought to the end. And if there's one blessing in all of this, and in the end it happened actually pretty quickly. Relatively, he didn't suffer too much. And you know, we're very thankful for that, because, you know, people who suffer this dreadful disease sometimes have a long, lingering, painful death. And thankfully, that wasn't the case for Marty.
Yeah, that is good news. When did you last see him, Grant?
I saw him on Wednesday last week for lunch. It was becoming a regular thing, and I texted him on Monday, and I was trying to do lunch Tuesday because I'm meant to be going to the golf at Queenstown next week, and he wasn't so good on Tuesday, and then I got back to him Wednesday morning, said, how about lunch Thursday, which was today, and he thought that was going to be just fine, but then I got a text from Lorraine yesterday that said that, you know, there was a bit of a new sort of site of pain, and they needed to get into the hospice to deal with that. And unfortunately, this time he didn't come out.
No. Foxy, just before you go, one thing that I think is wonderful about the end of his life is that he And you don't want to get carried away here, but he had demons because he put so much pressure on himself, and his quest for excellence was almost insatiable, wasn't it? It was almost impossible for him to satisfy his own standards. But in the end, he took stock and he realised that he had done as well as he could reasonably expect, and he was proud and settled, wasn't he, at the end?
You know, I think the word is content, John. He texts me after the double-hit lymphoma diagnosis, which, you know, really was not a good prognosis at all. Almost no one survives it. And it was a rather long text, and in the text was a cryptic message that says, "I'm at peace with it." And I had to read it a couple of times to understand what he meant. And what he meant is he was at peace with having to do this battle again with the thing he called his friend, because he'd been through it once. And he knew what he faced, and whatever the outcome, and he probably knew what the outcome would be, he was at peace with it. But, you know, the first bout with lymphoma, which he did win, he found a contentment inside him that I don't think he'd had all his adult life. Well, I'm being a little unkind, because in Lorraine, he found a soulmate, and that Lorraine wanted me, you know, to make sure that people understood that he was a loving husband, that he loved being a husband, especially to her. And that's not her words, that's mine. And loved being a dad to Emmy, you know, and they often say, and you've probably heard this lots of times, that people who've had a brush with cancer, it's life-changing for them. For those who survive, mostly for positive. They're glad they've had it because it's been life-changing. And that was the same for Marty. You know, sadly, it came back, and this was just an innings too far for him.
Foxy, that was beautifully put. Great mate, Grant Fox. Thank you so much,
It's
Grant
a pleasure,
Fox.
John. No problem.
Lovely to talk to you, Grant. Grant Fox, who was an All Black, Martin Crowe was a black cap. They met at Auckland Grammar as boys, and they remained friends for decades, 4 decades, and were still friends to the end of Martin Crowe's life. Beautiful. Black cap Kane Williamson said Martin Crowe's death had come as a shock to the team despite knowing he was unwell. He said he often received texts from Martin Crowe congratulating him on his performances, this kind of thing that Grant was just talking about, the most recent on Saturday. He spoke about Martin Crowe to media at Auckland International Airport as the Black Caps prepared for their T20 campaign in India.
Yeah, like I said, I did have little bits to do with Martin, and he was always really positive and had some really nice messages to share with me, and certainly appreciated that from, you know, certainly a legend of the game. And just like I say, it's a sad time to see, you know, a guy like Martin, who was so close to the country, you know, to lose him such a young age as well.
I know it's fresh, but has the team spoken at all about ways to remember him when you're over at the World T20?
Look, at this stage we just got to the airport, so we'll catch up, and no doubt we'll be discussing those options. That era of cricket was huge in the country, and captured the country, and you know, it was a positive time in the country. People got right behind the sport, so look, I think it was important that, you know, I guess with our opportunity to play a home World Cup, that we tried to do something similar. So no doubt that yeah, he was strong. He was behind that, I suppose. You know, he's a class player all around the ground. But certainly, you know, at this time, it's kind of not about cricket. You know, it's a tough time, particularly for his family. And like I say, our thoughts.
Kane Williamson talking at the airport as the Black Caps fly out for the T20 tournament. It is 17.5 minutes past 6. We're going to change the subject entirely now. Strong aftershocks have continued to rock Indonesia today after a 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck off the coast of Sumatra in the early hours of this morning. The quake sparked a tsunami warning that was later cancelled, but it still stirred up fears that a similar disaster to the 2004 Indian Ocean quake and tsunami, which killed more than 200,000 people, could possibly be on the cards. There have been no reports, fortunately, of deaths or major damage. The largest aftershock so far, 5.6 at a depth of 10k. Now, Kelvin Berryman is a geologist at GNS, and he has studied earthquakes both here and in Indonesia. He's with us now on Skype video. Kelvin, it's good to talk to you, as it always is. Thank you for your time. People talk about this ring of fire, and it's effectively the Pacific Rim, right? And this is where, particularly through New Zealand and Indonesia, the Indian Australian plates and the Pacific plates are meeting. And is that what's causing this activity, or have I completely got that wrong?
That's the overall setting, but this particular earthquake is actually one of those odd ones. It's actually out quite a long way out from the joining of the two plates. And it's similar in a similar area. The two very large earthquakes occurred in the similar area in 2012. And they were actually quite a lot bigger than this one. So these are out there in the bit of the plates that's not supposed to have earthquakes. So these are actually quite unusual earthquakes.
Kelvin, you've been up there and studied in Indonesia. What is happening underneath as these two major plates, fight for supremacy, I guess?
Right. The big earthquakes in 2004 was sort of the classic of what we call a subduction earthquake, one plate going underneath the other, and that occurs and that threatens a very large part of the southwest side of Indonesia. And indeed, the project we're involved in up there is really not so much the hard science, if you like, but actually it's to some extent coming after our experiences in Christchurch, is to train the local communities and the local people to try and find ways of becoming more resilient to inevitable earthquakes for the future.
Mm. What is the social impact of earthquakes in Indonesia? Obviously, the 2004 quake and tsunami is still fresh in everyone's minds. That was just a catastrophe. How do they cope psychologically, and how do they prepare for future events?
Yeah, it's a really complex. It's got population pressures, people living in places they know they shouldn't necessarily be living in the tsunami inundation zones. But there's a real mood in the country to do what they can to be better prepared before future earthquakes, and that comes to local communities or local civil defence people, training local communities and taking the quick wins in terms of reducing the possible future impact. So the Indonesians have got a lot of experience, of course, in all of this. So in a lot of ways, our project is learning from them as much as they might be learning from us.
I suspect Ring of Fire isn't a term you use, so I apologise for using it, but if we follow it down from Indonesia, it goes through the Kermadec Trench, and then we head down to the Alpine Fault and all that. Is activity that far north connected in any way to activity in New Zealand, or is it completely separate?
It's very separate, I think, in terms of one triggering the other, but of course you can join the dots between the two areas and, in fact, as you say, all the way around the Pacific. What we're learning from Indonesia, and this is the reciprocation, I guess, of our partnership there, is that we're learning that our Hikurangi margin along the east coast of the North Island has some similarities to the subduction zone in Indonesia and the really big earthquakes in 2004, and earlier than that, of course. We can see back thousands of years in some of this history.
Dr. Kelvin Berryman from GNS, the geologist at GNS, thank you for your time, Kelvin. We really appreciate it. It's 21.5 minutes past 6. The Wharenui at Oraki was full again today as hundreds more mourners paid their respects to celebrated Māori academic Dr. Ranginui Walker. Tomorrow he'll be farewelled at a church service at Oraki Marae beside Bastion Point there before being cremated in a private ceremony. Our Māori Issues correspondent Mihi Narangi Forbes has been there.
They came again in their hundreds, te kohanga reo, te ātārangi, ngā whariwānanga. Pen Bird from Te Kura o Tāwhiuau said Dr. Walker had set the example in education, while Hone Morris, who represented Massey universities, told the floor Ranginui's taiaha was his pen. Mr. Morris spoke also for author and long-time friend of Dr. Walker's, Paul Spoonley, who wrote his biography, Matatoa.
You know, he was very, very focused on what was happening in the Māori world, te ao Māori, te ao Pākehā, but also what the state was doing. And, you know, it didn't, I think 24 hours a day, you know, he was thinking about those things. And boy, did he have a sharp, clear mind.
A common theme in the speeches was Dr. Walker's listener columns. Paul Spoonley says he once wrote a letter to the editor in defence of an article written by Dr. Walker, and out of the blue he says the author arrived on his doorstep.
He said, "You wrote an article on the listener?" Yes, I did. Attacking somebody who was attacking me? Yes, I did. And then he said to me, Pākehā need to attack the racist in their midst. Oh, okay, all right. So that was a message that I got, and Ranginui was not short of telling you his opinion.
Professor Spoonley spent many years with both Ranginui and Deirdre Walker, drinking tea and eating scones as he sat writing his book, Matatoa.
And so Ranginui needed her. She was great in terms of providing support for him and guidance for him. And she could be more radical than Ranginui on occasions. So they were a great team, and I would always think of them as a team.
Māori Development Minister Te Ururo Flavel was a student under Dr. Walker. He says the lessons were life-changing.
Because for the first time you could actually hear from someone that was in it, writing about it, talking about it, the issues that faced our people at the time, which included, as we stand here on Takaparawha, the whole background towards what happened here, issues around the confiscations. I mean, those were issues that were absolutely new to people that were from my generation coming out of school.
Jane Kelsey says Dr. Walker was a generous educationalist who could be gentle and fierce.
Rangi was out there as the voice defending, and that's what he did for me, that's what he did throughout the 80s for the young Māori activists who aren't so young anymore. He was there as a defender, he was there as a mentor, he never had any qualms about speaking truth to power, whether it was inside the university, whether it was within the country or internationally, and he set the role model.
Groups are continuing to arrive at the gate of Orake, and proceedings will continue until sunset. For Checkpoint, this is Mihingarangi Forbes.
Coming up on World Watch PM at 6:30 with John Greaves, as it is every weeknight, news of a planned increase in military spending by China fuels tensions further in the South China Sea, and a European Union plan to help member nations cope with the refugee crisis. Amazing account we had before from the border of Greece and Macedonia. Finally tonight, we return to Martin Crowe himself and the sad news of his death today. And we thought it would be fitting to end the programme tonight by giving the last word to the cricketing great. So here he is in a 2013 interview with our colleague Catherine Ryan on 9 to Noon, talking her with great joy through a career highlight.
When I got to Lord's as a young 18-year-old, young player at a Lord's scholarship in 1981, I was in heaven, and I just loved that 6 months. As soon as I batted at Lord's, the 100 came, and the tears came and the emotions came. And then when I played for New Zealand, on the same day that this beautiful young Pakuranga girl was winning Miss Universe in Missouri in 1983, on July the 11th, I was scoring my first 100 for New Zealand. There's a little bit of serendipity in all of this. And then to score 2 Test centuries at Lord's, which is the mecca of the game. They are the 2 greatest memories, experiences that I've had, because they prove that dreams do come true.
Would you have lived this life without it?
No, I wouldn't have.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, no, that was bliss. It's funny, you remember the applause. It's a gentle applause, and it does build, but it's very respectful, and it's and the gate swings open, and you can hear the hinges on the little swing door of the picket fence as you walk out of the pavilion onto this ground that slopes dramatically, and then you're walking into heaven's world, and then it's just lovely. I had some failures there too, by the way, but that just made the 200s all the more memorable.
You write with passion about the sport in this book. I'm coming to Lorraine, speaking of passion. You write with passion in this book about the sport. You pick your favourite side. Your mind is still thinking about the ways it can develop. So I'm glad to hear that there was some joy in it for you. Lorraine is huge in your life, and I wonder also some of this internal battle that we were talking about and some of that arrested development of the 14-year-old boy, I think you've told us, did affect your early relationships. And were you ready by the time the pair of you get the chance to meet for the upteenth time, it seems?
Yes.
Were you ready finally for a relationship that clearly has brought you security and happiness?
Were we ready in 2005? Yes, we were. I mean, it was, and the book reveals the the aborted starts, I suppose, of... Well, she was married in 1990 when we did a funny 3-day video together for the National Bank, and then in 2001 it's my birthday, and one of my great friends is using Lorraine as a model, and so we meet up and do a movie, and we have a kiss, and then there's this moment of, do we take it further? And she said, no, I'm not ready, and neither are you, which was profound. And then 6 months later, I'm in a relationship which bears my beautiful daughter, Emma, and it's like, thank God I have this amazing ability to be a father, and this little, not little anymore, but she's 10, to guide me with unconditional love. You know, that's so important. And then when I bump into Lorraine 4 years later, she sees a change, and I think it's fatherhood that's the change she's seen.
It's Martin Crowe talking to our colleague Catherine Ryan on 9 to Noon in 2013. Martin Crowe, who died today aged 53 from lymphoma. A really wonderful cricketer who changed the game in this country, who believed in himself, had a dream of becoming a black cap, became one, and became one of the greats. Lots of lovely tributes to him tonight. Thank you to everyone who's helped us celebrate that life today. That is Checkpoint for this evening. Thank you for listening. We'll be back again at 5 tomorrow.
Well, it's 6:30. Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Tonight, the UN unanimously agrees to a fresh round of sanctions on North Korea. An American Republican presidential hopeful prepares to pull out of the race, and plane debris washes up on the coast of Mozambique. Those stories and more in World Watch PM. Let's begin World Watch close to home in China, which is expected to announce its biggest military budget increase in nearly a decade, fueled by increasing tensions in the South China Sea and, of course, the need for the latest weaponry. The increase is set to worry countries in the region, which see the massive rise as a driver of an Asian arms race. Matthew Carney reports from